Continuing on with our introduction to Mathcad, we're going to use the equation solver now. And again, we in the last video we plotted these different curves to demonstrate that you can plot multiple curves on with Mathcad. Notice that with the spacing on these numbers, the decimals are a little strange. Again, when in doubt, double click. I had turned off the auto grid. Maybe I'll make that 10 divisions instead and try that. And so that looks a little better now. It's in 1.5 increments. So anyways, let's go ahead. All right, so this equation is used to calculate the length of a chain, or it relates the length of a chain that's going around two sprockets. Say if you don't have an idler sprocket and you have to have the exact center to center distance. So C is the center to center distance between the two sprockets. L is the length of chain. P is the pitch of chain. And again, the pitch of a chain is just the distance between the centers of the rollers. So ANSI 35 chain has a 3/8 pitch, or a 3/8 of an inch distance between the rollers on the chain. And again, the N is the number of teeth. And so anyways, if we wanted to put this equation into Mathcad so that we could use it to solve for these distances, normally what you do is, if you're designing a sprocket box, you have an idea of how far apart you want the centers to be. So you can put that number in for C, and you know what size sprockets you have. Maybe you have a 20 tooth and a 60 tooth sprocket, something like that. And then you go ahead and calculate the length. But the problem is, of course, is you can't just use any length for a chain. It has to, generally you want to use a length that's an even number of pitches. So if you have 3/8 pitch chain, then you want to have some length of chain that's divisible by 3/4, right? 2 pitches, so that you don't have to use an offset connecting link. So if you have an idea for the center to center distance you have room for, you can go ahead and put that in this equation, calculate the length, and then divide that length by 0.75 if it's ANSI 35 chain, and then round up or down to get the length that you can actually make. Now you put that length back in this equation, and you can solve for C. And C, generally you want to be with to like 1/1000th of an inch, because if you have heavy-duty steel chain, you're not going to be able to stretch it very much, and at the same time you don't want it to be too tight. So you could solve explicitly for C in this equation, but you would then end up with a quadratic, which is okay. You could solve that, but of course with Mathcad, it's easy enough just to go ahead and use the equation solver. So I'm going to pause for a second and put some of these parameters into Mathcad. Okay, to put in some text. One thing, Mathcad, as soon as you hit the space bar, if you haven't put in any other kind of math symbols, so if I just want to call this chain, I hit the space bar, see that changes it to a text box. You can always use the insert up here to insert a text box. So we'll go ahead and maybe you have the editing capability here. You can make it bold, underline it. You'll notice that you can put subscripts in over here, but when you create a Mathcad equation, you want to use the period. So in other words, if you wanted x sub 2, you would put x period and then put the 2 in. Do not use the subscript. It will look exactly the same in Mathcad, but it's not the same thing. Whereas if you're just putting in a text, some text, then you can use the subscript. I've put in the initial values for these parameters. Put in a note here. You do have to, when you use the equation solver, you do have to start off by giving all the parameters values, even if you don't know what they are yet. And I'll have to pick up from here for with the next video.